Robert Kelly, who's a professor in the Department of Political Science and Diplomacy at Busan National University. Robert, good to meet you here, and my regards to your famous live shot stealing children, of course. So when we look at this arms race, are threats intensifying the advancement, or are the advancement of these weapons intensifying the threats, or both?
Yeah, it's almost certainly both, right? But I mean, technology always marches on, and as technologies have sort of come on throughout human existence for thousands of years, they've been militarized almost immediately. The internet got used fairly rapidly for hacking and things like that, right? So it's not a surprise that the ability to sort of like launch a vehicle into space, for example, go to the moon, could also be used to launch a weapon, right? So to the extent that technology keeps on progressing, you're going to see an arms race naturally flow out of that, particularly since you've got pretty serious ideological adversaries out there like China and the United States, or North Korea and South Korea, right? Russia and the European Union increasingly over Ukraine, right? So that the technology sort of builds on those pre-existing tensions.
So we hear a lot lately about hypersonic missiles, those who likely have them, those who want to have them. Is that what concerns you most about the build-up and advancement of weapons, or is it something else that we don't know? And also, is it true that the West is somewhat behind on this?
Yeah, so the big concern about hypersonic missiles is actually not the speed. I think there's been sort of a lot of unnecessary focus on that in the last couple of weeks. I think the real issue, as your correspondent pointed out before, actually is the maneuverability issue, right? And that's because it makes it harder to defend against them, right? I mean, this, I think, is sort of really the future for sort of countries that fear missile proliferation and missile use, right? Can we shoot them down? And missile defense is already very, very difficult. It's often likened in the literature to shooting a bullet with another bullet. It's extraordinarily hard because the missiles travel so fast, and then you add in the maneuverability, and it becomes even more difficult. My big concern actually is not so much use. I actually don't think, for example, that the North Koreans or the Chinese or the Russians are nihilistic and they're just going to sort of launch. It would take sort of like a major crisis along the lines of like World War I or something to get to that kind of point. My real concern is proliferation, right, to rogue states and terrorists.
Yeah, and it's always this eternal question, and some people like to say, well, if everything evens out, that's just keeping things somehow safer. But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a big debate also out there, and just sort of in the literature about sort of like why wars begin. That's actually a really good question, right? But to the extent that everybody more or less has sort of the same stuff, right? It does sort of reduce the perception that there are windows of opportunity, right? That you can sort of strike before the other guy gets the other thing, right? I mean, there is a debate about whether or not nuclear weapons actually, for example, do they actually make states more responsible in their foreign policy because they're so dangerous, they encourage a kind of rationality that may not have existed before. But all things being equal, I mean, the better thing to do, of course, would be sort of cap and limit, right? Even if everybody had these things, what you really want to stop is the growth, right? Where, instead of, today they have 1,000 and, 2 years from now they have 10,000, you want to sort of limit it, even if everyone had the tech, and that would mean arms control.
Sure, and in these countries that have them, you never know what the next administration is going to bring in terms of, morality. So, Robert, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.